I will never forget the look on Daniel's face when that man walked up to the coffin and said, "Dad, I miss you so much." Daniel froze. He looked at the man, then at the coffin, then back at the man. "I'm sorry, what did you just call him?" "Dad." He was my father too. And that was the moment when the calmest funeral I had ever supervised turned into the most devastating family revelation I've witnessed in 17 years of working as a gravedigger. Because it wasn't just one secret brother who was about to show up, there were three. My name is Robert, and this is the true story of how one man discovered, on the worst day of his life, that his family was much bigger and much more complicated than he ever imagined. Let me give you the full picture from the beginning. It was a Thursday in June, one of those hot mornings when the sun hits the marble of the tombs and everything feels quieter than usual. I was preparing the chapel for the funeral of Mr. Mario Carter, 68 years old, retired from an oil company. What did I know about him at that point? Not much. A discreet man, died of a heart attack while fishing at the city lake, left behind one son, Daniel, 35, and had been widowed for about 10 years. His wife had died of cancer. Daniel arrived early. Tall guy, glasses, that tired look of someone who hasn't slept properly in days. He came alone. And that caught my attention, because normally, at funerals, families arrive together, supporting each other. But Daniel was alone, completely alone. "Mr. Robert," he said when I came to check that everything was ready, "there won't be many people. My dad was a private man. A few co-workers maybe. Some neighbors. That's all." I nodded. I'd seen funerals like that before. People who lived quiet, small lives. Not sad, just different. Daniel arranged some photos on a small side table. I noticed there were only 3 people in all of them. Him, his father, and presumably his late mother. A very small family indeed. The funeral started quietly. Around 10, maybe 12 friends arrived. Older folks, mostly from the oil company days. That respectful silence typical of funerals. Whispered words, a few contained tears. Daniel received condolences politely, but it was clear he was on autopilot. That numb state before grief truly hits. I stayed nearby, as I always do, discreet but attentive. You never know when someone might faint or when something unexpected might happen. It was around 10:30 in the morning when I saw him arrive. A black man, about 40 years old, well-dressed, navy blue suit, tie, tall, strong. He stopped at the chapel entrance for a good 30 seconds, just staring at the coffin from a distance. There was something in his posture, a kind of familiarity, a pain that felt deeply personal. He began to walk toward the coffin, slowly. Each step seemed heavy. When he reached it, he placed his hand on the edge, closed his eyes, and I saw a tear roll down his face. "Dad, I miss you so much. I wish we'd had more time together." "Dad." I saw the exact moment Daniel, who was standing about 10 feet away talking to one of his father's friends, froze in place. He turned his head slowly, as if he wasn't sure he had heard right. Daniel slowly approached the man. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice tense. "What did you just call him?" "Dad. He was my father too." Daniel let out a short, nervous laugh, one of those disbelieving laughs that come from pure shock. "No, man, you must be mistaken. That's Mario Carter, my father. I'm his only son. I'm an only child." "I know who he is," Ryan replied, his voice calm but firm. "My name is Ryan. Mario Carter was my father too. I'm 42 years old. I was born before you." The silence that fell over the chapel was absolute. Everyone stopped talking. All eyes turned toward them. Daniel shook his head in disbelief. "That doesn't make any sense. My father was married to my mother for 40 years. 40 years! They met in college. I know his whole life story." Ryan took a deep breath. "Your father had a life before he married your mother, a life he chose not to tell you about. My mother, Teresa, dated him for 3 years when they were in their 20s. She got pregnant, he got scared, he was young, unprepared. They broke up. He met your mother soon after, and I grew up knowing who my father was. But he asked my mother not to tell anyone. He helped us financially, paid for my school, my college, but we met secretly, once or twice a year. Daniel had gone pale, completely drained of color. That's a lie. Some kind of scam to get money, or I don't want anything. Ryan interrupted. I just wanted to say goodbye to my father. I have documents if you want to see them, my birth certificate with his name, old photos, messages, but I swear, Daniel, I didn't come here to cause trouble. I lost my father too. You understand? Daniel started trembling. His legs gave out. I rushed to his side, grabbed his arm and helped him sit down. Breathe, son. Just breathe. But the story was only beginning.
Daniel sat there, his head in his hands, trying to process what had just happened. When I heard the chapel door open again, a woman walked in. Light brown skin, around 38 years old, wearing a simple black dress, her hair tied back. She was holding a boy by the hand, about 12 or 13 years old. She looked around, spotted the coffin, and began to walk toward it. But when she saw Ryan standing by the coffin, she froze. Her eyes widened. "Ryan?" she said, her voice trembling. Ryan turned, and the look on his face was pure shock. "Michelle? You too?" I didn't understand anything at that point, but something was happening, something way beyond anyone's imagination. Michelle nodded slowly, tears already streaming down her face. "He was my father too," she said, her voice breaking. "I found out when I was 15. My mother told me. They had an affair when he was already married. She worked as a secretary at his company." Ryan rubbed his face in disbelief. "You weren't at the meetings," he said. "He used to bring you too?" "What meetings?" Daniel's voice cracked as he got up. "What meetings?" Michelle explained. Once a year, on his birthday, he'd rent a small farm. He would gather all the children he had outside his marriage. He'd throw a barbecue, talk to us, ask about our lives. That was the only day of the year I saw my father. Daniel stared at her, horrified. "How many?" he asked, barely able to speak. "How many children did he have?" Michelle and Ryan exchanged looks, and then the boy, who had been silent all along, took a step forward. "I'm his son too," he said, his small voice trembling but steady. "My name is Peter. I'm 13. My mom died last year. Grandpa Mario raised me since then. I used to live with him." The air in the chapel felt heavy. Daniel looked at the boy as if he were seeing a ghost. You lived with him?" "Yes," he nodded, "since my mom died of an overdose. Dad, he told me I was his grandson, that my father had left us. But one day I found my birth certificate. The name on it said Mario Carter, the same as his ID. Daniel sat down again, or rather collapsed into the chair. "How many?" he whispered again. "How many more?" Ryan sighed. "At those meetings, there were 6 of us. 6 kids outside the marriage, but the other 3 live in different states. I don't even know if they know he died. 6. Daniel had 6 secret siblings. The funeral had completely stopped. The old oil company friends stood there, stunned, speechless. Nobody knew what to say. Daniel stood up slowly. He walked over to the coffin and stared at his father's lifeless face for a long moment. Then he spoke, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Who were you?" He wasn't talking to anyone there. He was talking to the body in the coffin. "For 35 years, I thought I knew you. I thought it was just the 2 of us after Mom died. You used to hug me and tell me family was the most important thing in the world, that honesty meant everything. And you had 6 children I never even knew existed?" His voice grew louder, rougher. "You had dinner with me every Sunday. every single Sunday. I'd tell you about my life, my problems, and you'd give me advice, pretending to care while hiding 6 entire lives from me. 6 people. Ryan stepped forward. Daniel, he did care about you. He talked about you all the time, with pride. You were the son he could claim, the official one. We always knew you had a place we'd never have. A place? Daniel turned toward Ryan, tears streaming down his face. What place? The place built on lies? Because everything in my life was a lie. The perfect family? A lie. The honest man? A lie. The devoted father? A lie. Michelle started crying too. He wasn't perfect, she said through tears, but he tried. In his own messy, cowardly way, he tried to be there for us. He paid for my college, took me to the doctor when I was sick, called on my birthday. It wasn't enough, but it was what he could give. Daniel shook his head in despair. And my mother? Did she know? Silence. Did she know? He shouted. Ryan bit his lip. I don't know, but once, when I was about 20, I ran into him at a shopping mall, by accident. He was with a woman. He saw me and went pale, but she looked at me like she knew, like she'd seen others like me before. So she knew, Daniel said, his voice breaking completely. She knew and never told me. They both lied to me my whole life. The boy, Peter, who had been standing quietly, stepped closer, his voice small and trembling. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble. Dad, he was nice to me. He made pancakes in the morning, helped me with homework. He laughed a lot. I never saw him angry. Daniel looked at the boy, and something in that small, frightened face broke something inside him. He knelt down in front of the boy. It's not your fault, he said, wiping his own tears. None of this is your fault, okay? You're just a kid. Are you my brother? Peter asked softly. Daniel closed his eyes, took a deep breath. Looks like it. And then he hugged the boy. Peter hugged him back, and the two of them began to cry together. Right there in the chapel, with their father's body lying in the coffin, the pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. Ryan, 42, was the oldest, the child from a relationship before marriage. Michelle, 38, was the result of an affair when Daniel was about 10. There were 3 other siblings who weren't present. Richard, 35, from around the same time as Michelle, living in Chicago. Julia, 30, from another relationship, living in New York. And Luke, 28, the youngest of the secret children, living in Seattle. And Peter, 13, the grandson who was actually a son. His mother had been one of Mario's lovers years ago. 7 children in total. Daniel was the only legitimate one. Daniel asked quietly, his voice tired, And child support? Did he pay for everyone? Ryan nodded. He always did. On time, never missed a payment. My mom said that aside from not claiming us publicly, he was responsible. Responsible, Daniel repeated bitterly. That's an interesting word. He had financial responsibility, but not emotional courage. Money, but no guts.
Michelle sat down in one of the chairs. My therapist says he was a product of his generation. Men back then were raised to keep up appearances, to project an image. He didn't have the courage to break free from that. That doesn't excuse it, Daniel said. No, Michelle agreed. It doesn't excuse it, but it helps us understand. That's when one of the oil company friends, an old man around 70, stepped forward timidly. Daniel, I think I owe you the truth, he said. Daniel looked up, exhausted. Please tell me you're not my brother, too? The old man gave a sad laugh. No, but I knew about the other families. Mario told me around 15 years ago. He carried a huge burden of guilt. Said he'd made mistakes when he was young and didn't know how to fix them later. The longer he kept it a secret, the harder it became to tell the truth. "And you never thought about telling me?" Daniel asked. "It wasn't my story to tell, son. And honestly, I didn't know if it would be better or worse for you to know. Sometimes truth doesn't set you free. It just hurts." Daniel sat in silence for a long time. The funeral continued, but it wasn't the same anymore. It wasn't a formal or distant event. It had become something else, cathartic. Ryan, Michelle, Peter, and Daniel stayed there, talking, sharing memories. They began to notice similarities, the same sense of humor, the same gestures. Ryan drummed his fingers when he was nervous, just like Daniel. Michelle bit the corner of her lip when she was thinking. Daniel did that too. "It's strange," Michelle said at one point. "We're literal strangers, but when I look at you, I see family traits. Ryan's eyebrows, Daniel's face shape, Peter's eyes. DNA, the only honest thing in this whole story." Peter, sitting next to Daniel, asked quietly, "What's going to happen to me now? I don't have anyone else. My grandma on my mom's side died when I was a baby. I don't know my grandpa." Daniel looked at the boy, then at Ryan and Michelle. "We'll figure it out together," he said. "Apparently, we're family, even if we found out in the worst way possible." Ryan nodded. "My house is small, but there's an extra room. I can be his temporary guardian until we sort out the legal part. I can help financially, and I want to get to know him better. Get to know all of you better, if you want that, of course." Michelle wiped her tears. "I always wanted siblings. It's weird to get them like this, but yeah, I want to know you." There was a moment of silence. Then Daniel looked at the coffin again. "He really screwed us up, huh?" Daniel said with a humorless laugh. "Even after death, he's still messing up our lives." "Or maybe," Ryan replied thoughtfully, "in his own twisted way, he's finally bringing us together. He never managed that in life. But now we found each other." "Optimistic." "Realistic," Ryan corrected. "The situation's a mess, but we get to choose what happens next. We can turn our backs on each other, each holding on to our pain, or we can try to build something new, not to honor his memory, but to honor ourselves, to prove we're better than his mistakes."
The burial took place in the late afternoon. I organize everything as I always do, but this one was different. Before we closed the coffin, Daniel asked for a moment. He stood there, looking at his father for nearly 5 minutes. No one rushed him, no one interrupted. Then he spoke, softly but firmly. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you. Maybe someday, maybe not. But I do know this. I won't let your lies define who I am, and I won't let them stop me from knowing my brothers and sisters. I'll do what you never had the courage to do. I'll unite this family." He stepped back and Ryan came forward. "Thank you," Ryan said quietly. "Thank you for giving me a name, for paying for my education, for those barbecues once a year. It wasn't enough, but it was what you could give. I wish you'd been braver, but thank you for not abandoning me completely." Michelle also said her goodbye. "I spent so long being angry at you," she said, "angry for being a secret, angry that I couldn't call you Dad in public, angry that I had to watch you live a life I wasn't part of. But today, I choose to let go of that anger. Not for you, for me." Peter was the last. He placed a drawing inside the coffin, a drawing of 2 people fishing. "You said we'd go fishing again on Sunday," he said, his voice trembling. "You promised. But it's okay. I'll keep the good stuff. The pancakes, the stories, the laughter. Thanks for taking care of me when no one else would." We closed the coffin. The walk to the grave was silent. When we lowered it, I noticed something. Daniel, Ryan, Michelle, and Peter were standing side by side, not speaking, just standing there, together. After everyone left, I was finishing covering the grave when Daniel came back alone. "Mr. Robert," he called, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, son." "In all these years working here, have you ever seen a normal family without secrets, without pain, without complications?" I leaned on my shovel and thought for a moment. "No," I said honestly. "But you know what I've learned? There's no such thing as a normal family. Every family is a mess. Some are just better at hiding it. What makes the difference isn't the absence of problems. It's what they do when those problems come to light." 3 months passed. The family of 7, yes, 7, began to find their rhythm. It wasn't easy. There were arguments, resentments, and awkward silences, but there were also dinners, laughs, and a strange sense of belonging that none of them had felt before. Daniel organized the first Carter family meeting at the same farm where Mario used to gather his secret children. This time, there were no secrets, no lies, just truth. Ryan arrived first, carrying a cooler full of meat. Michelle brought salads and desserts. Julia came from New York with her husband and their baby. Richard showed up later, quiet but curious. Luke came last, shy, reserved, but smiling. And Peter, the youngest, ran around the place with a soccer ball, shouting, "Come on, uncles, let's play." Daniel looked around and couldn't help but smile. He took a deep breath and said, "You know, if Dad were here, he'd probably say something like, 'See, I told you you'd all get along.'" Ryan laughed. "Yeah, he'd probably take all the credit." They all laughed, not bitterly, but genuinely, because at that moment, something shifted. The weight that had hung over them since the funeral began to lift. Michelle raised a glass. To Dad, not for what he was, but for what he accidentally gave us. Daniel raised his glass too. To truth, may we never repeat his mistakes. Peter added, "And to family, the real kind." They all clinked glasses. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and gold. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the horizon. And yes, I was there too, invited by Daniel as the man who saw everything. I looked at that family and thought about how, in all my years working in cemeteries, I had never seen anything quite like it. Life has a strange way of fixing what it breaks. Sometimes it doesn't fix it perfectly. There are still cracks, scars, and uneven edges, but it still finds a way to make something beautiful out of the wreckage. That's what happened with the Carters. They were a broken family, but they learned how to rebuild. And maybe that's what life really is. Not a story about perfection, but about forgiveness, truth, and the courage to start over.